They didn't argue with her. They didn't raise their voices. They just pointed at the scan and slid the folder back across the table. Declared unfit for combat. One injury, one medical code, and 20 years of service erased with a signature. No more deployments. No operational clearance. No rifle in her hands. She was reassigned quietly. Range oversight. Training schedules. Watching younger soldiers qualify on weapons she was no longer allowed to touch. They said it wasn't personal. That the standards were the standards. That the body eventually becomes a liability. She nodded, signed the form, and went back to work, teaching fundamentals to soldiers who thought experience had an expiration date. Then, at 2:17 in the morning, the base went silent. Lights cut out. Radios died mid-sentence. Security feeds went black. The first gunshots didn't come from outside the perimeter. They came from inside. Every active marksman on the installation was either deployed, wounded, or trapped. Command pulled up the roster, scrolled past one name, then stopped. The woman they had declared unfit. The one they said was finished. The one who still knew the terrain by memory, and the wind by instinct. And with the base dark, senior officers pinned down, and no margin for error, they had seconds to choose. Trust the medical paperwork, or trust the woman they had already written off. Before we tell you what happened next, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. Because what happened next wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, it was exact, and it changed everything. The call didn't come through official channels. There was no announcement, no alert tone, no rank in the voice, just a quiet knock on the door. She opened it to find a junior officer standing alone in the corridor, helmet under one arm, eyes steady but tight. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice. "Command needs you to look at something." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask under whose authority. She took her jacket from the back of the chair, slipped it on, and followed him into the dark. The hallways were running on emergency power. Half-lit. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. As they moved, she noticed things most people wouldn't. The pattern of the silence. Which doors were closed that should have been open? Which intersections felt watched? They reached a side entrance to the operations wing. Inside, the room was tense but controlled. No shouting. No chaos. Just officers standing very still around a single table. Maps were spread out. Screens flickered intermittently. Someone had drawn crude red marks over sections of the base. Paths, choke points, blind spots. She didn't step forward. She waited. Finally, the commanding officer spoke. "We're blind," he said. "Partial power. No perimeter sensors. Drone coverage gone. All active sniper teams are either deployed overseas or trapped inside kill zones." He paused. "The attackers know the base. They're moving deliberately. Not fast. Not random." Her eyes moved over the map. She saw it immediately. "They're controlling space," she said calmly. Every head in the room turned. She stepped closer now, pointing, not touching, just hovering her finger over the map. "See these gaps? These aren't mistakes. They're lanes. They're pushing us away from elevation and forcing response units into predictable corridors." No one interrupted her. "They're trained," she continued. "Not militia. Not amateurs." The commanding officer nodded slowly. "We believe there are between 9 and 12 hostiles. Possibly more. All inside the perimeter." She studied the angles, the distances, the wind patterns she remembered from years of drills on those same grounds. "Where's your overwatch?" she asked. A beat. Then someone answered quietly. "We don't have one." The room stayed silent. She didn't react. Didn't fill the space. She simply asked, "What rifles are still secured?" A sergeant cleared his throat. "One Barrett. One bolt-action trainer. Ammunition is limited." She nodded once. "Which building has uninterrupted line of sight to the Eastern Training Complex?" Another pause. Someone zoomed the map. "The old range tower," a captain said. "But it's been offline since the blackout." She looked up. "That's fine." The commanding officer hesitated. "You're not cleared for." "I'm not asking to deploy," she said evenly. "I'm asking for terrain." That stopped him. She met his eyes. "If you don't stop them at distance, they'll force close contact. And you'll lose people you can't replace." Silence again. Then, quietly, "How many shots?" She studied the map one last time. "As many as it takes," she said. "But not more than necessary." The officer exhaled. "Get her access," he said. No one argued. They moved fast after that, but not rushed. The kind of speed that comes from trust replacing doubt. As she walked toward the range tower, she felt the familiar pull in her spine. Not pain, a reminder. She adjusted her stride slightly, shifted her weight. By the time she reached the stairwell, her breathing was already controlled. She climbed without hurrying, each step measured. At the top, the door creaked open to a view she hadn't seen in years. The base stretched out below, dark, quiet, wrong. She set the rifle on the platform, checked the bolt, checked the scope. Wind brushed her cheek. She closed her eyes for half a second. Not to pray, to remember. Distances. Drop. Drift. When she opened them again, the crosshairs were already steady. This wasn't about proving anything. This was about precision. And somewhere below, the first target moved into view. She didn't rush the shot. She let the rifle settle into the platform as if it belonged there, as if it had been waiting. Below her, the base looked unfamiliar in the dark. Buildings that once felt orderly now felt hostile. Every shadow had intention. She tracked movement near the Eastern Training Complex. One figure, then another. They weren't running. They were advancing in short, controlled movements, using cover that only someone who knew the base would choose. She adjusted the scope slightly, measured distance by memory first, confirmed it by optics second. 900 meters. Wind drifting left to right. Light but steady. She didn't think in numbers anymore. She thought in feel. The first target paused near a concrete barrier, raising his weapon toward a doorway where American personnel were pinned down. She waited, not because she hesitated, because timing mattered more than speed. When he leaned just far enough to expose himself, she exhaled slowly and applied pressure. The shot cracked once, sharp, contained. The recoil pushed back into her shoulder, familiar and manageable. She stayed on the scope, watched. The target dropped instantly. No drama, no second movement. She didn't celebrate. She was already scanning for the next threat. Contact neutralized. Came a quiet voice over the radio from somewhere below. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Two more figures emerged from behind a maintenance vehicle, moving in coordination now. They knew. They were being watched. They tried to adjust. That was their mistake. She tracked the lead man, calculated his pace, and led the shot just enough. The second shot followed the first by less than 10 seconds. Another clean hit. The third figure froze. Looked around. She waited for him to move. He didn't. He crouched, pressed flat to the ground, trying to disappear. She adjusted elevation. The angle was awkward. The shot would be unforgiving. She took it anyway. 3 shots. 3 impacts. The radio came alive now, not excited, not loud. Just controlled confirmations. Eastern approach clear. She shifted position slightly, easing pressure off her spine without breaking focus. Her breathing never changed. Below, the attackers adapted faster now. They stopped moving in pairs, started spreading out. One attempted to relocate toward the vehicle depot, using darkness and debris. She tracked him through partial cover, waiting for a gap. He sprinted. She led him perfectly. 4th shot. He collapsed mid-stride. She adjusted again. 5th target appeared briefly in a second-story window. Too brief. She didn't take it. She waited. Seconds passed. Then the window shattered outward as the target attempted to fire blindly. That moment was enough. 5th shot. The muzzle flash below vanished permanently. She felt it then, not pain, but strain. A dull pressure along her lower back. She shifted her stance minutely, redistributed weight, and locked herself in again. This wasn't endurance. This was economy. In the command room, officers watched in stunned silence as red markers vanished from the map one by one. No missed shots. No collateral movement. Just clean disappearances. Whoever that is, someone whispered. They're dismantling the attack. Back in the tower, she changed magazines without looking. Her hands knew the sequence better than her conscious mind ever could. 6th target. Then 7th. One at a time. Never rushed. Never wasted. Each shot placed where it would end the threat without drawing attention to her position. She noticed something else now. The attackers weren't just being eliminated. They were being herded. Their remaining movements funneled them toward open ground, toward distance, exactly where she wanted them. The wind shifted slightly. She adjusted. 8th shot. A longer hold. A deeper breath. Hit. Below, American units began moving again, carefully now, with space she had created. She heard it in the radio traffic. Relief, controlled but unmistakable. She ignored it. There were still threats. And she hadn't missed yet. Somewhere beyond the training complex, a figure paused at the edge of darkness, scanning upward, sensing something wrong. She already had him. The ninth shot echoed across the silent base. And with it, the attackers finally understood something they hadn't planned for. They weren't fighting a response force. They were being hunted by precision. And the night was no longer theirs. They stopped moving the way attackers move. That was the first sign. The remaining figures no longer advanced with confidence or coordination. They paused, listened, looked over their shoulders instead of forward. She saw it immediately. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like hesitation. She adjusted the scope and scanned farther out, toward the perimeter roads and auxiliary structures most people forgot existed. That's where experience mattered. New operators focus on where the fight is. Veterans focus on where it will go next. She spotted the 10th target near a fuel storage building, crouched low, trying to blend into shadow. He wasn't aiming at anything. He was waiting, listening for an opening. She didn't give him one. The shot was longer than the others. Past 1,000 meters now. The wind had shifted again, subtle but constant. She waited through an entire breathing cycle, letting the moment settle, then pressed. The bullet arrived before the sound did. Target down. Her jaw tightened slightly, not from effort, but from awareness. They were changing tactics. 2 signatures appeared on her scope at once, separated by distance, but moving in parallel. They were trying to split her attention. She smiled, not visibly, not emotionally, but internally, at the simplicity of the attempt. She tracked the left one first. He moved faster, sloppier, less trained. She took him mid-step. The second figure froze, then dove for cover behind a concrete barrier. She waited. He peeked. She didn't fire. He peeked again, faster this time, thinking speed would protect him. It didn't. 2 shots. 2 seconds. Silence again. In the command room, the map looked unreal now. Red markers almost gone. Someone counted under their breath. Another officer whispered, "This shouldn't be possible." No one corrected him. On the tower, she rolled her shoulders carefully, easing tension without losing alignment. The strain in her back was sharper now, but contained. She had learned long ago that pain was a signal, not a command. She adjusted her stance, distributing weight through her legs, using the platform instead of fighting it. Farther out, near the eastern perimeter, movement. Fast. 3 figures. They weren't attacking anymore. They were running. She didn't rush. Running targets make mistakes. She tracked the first, gauging speed, angle, and terrain. Open ground. No cover. Poor choice. She led the shot cleanly and watched him fall forward, momentum carrying him a step beyond where he should have been. The second figure changed direction abruptly, zigzagging. She adjusted. Waited. He slowed instinctively, just for a fraction of a second. That was enough. Another hit. The third made it farther. Almost to the tree line. Almost. She followed him steadily, ignoring the tightening in her spine, ignoring the radio chatter now spilling with urgency and disbelief. She waited until he broke cover, sprinting for what he thought was safety. She placed the crosshairs ahead of him and pressed. He never reached the trees. She exhaled slowly. For the first time since the blackout, the base felt different. Not safe, but no longer hunted. She scanned again. Nothing immediate. She waited anyway. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then movement. Low, cautious, near a service tunnel entrance. One final signature. Smarter than the others. He stayed close to structures, used angles well, avoided exposure. She studied him. This one would require patience. She let him move. Let him think he was unseen. When he finally paused to signal, raising his hand briefly into the open, she took the shot. The final target dropped without sound. She stayed on the scope. Counted. Checked. Confirmed. Only when the night gave her nothing back did she speak. "Area secure," she said quietly into the radio. The response didn't come immediately. When it did, the voice was different. Lower. Steadier. "Copy that," the commanding officer said. "All hostile signatures are down." She leaned back slowly, careful not to rush the motion. Her spine protested. She acknowledged it and moved anyway. This wasn't victory. This was completion. Below, units began moving freely again. Medics reached the wounded. Doors opened. Lights flickered back in sections. In the tower, she cleared the rifle with practiced ease, setting it down gently, respectfully. She didn't look back at the base. She already knew what she'd done. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see yet, was how deeply that night had unsettled the rules that had once declared her finished, and how many people were about to realize they'd made a mistake. She didn't stay to watch the base come back to life. She packed the rifle the way she always had, slowly, methodically, with respect, cleared the chamber, checked the bolt, closed the case. Only then did she sit down, not because she was tired, because the work was finished. The pain in her back surfaced fully now, no longer held at bay by focus and adrenaline. She adjusted her posture, breathed through it, and waited for it to settle into something manageable. Footsteps echoed on the stairs below. She knew who it would be before the door opened. The commanding officer stepped inside first. Behind him, two others, senior, deliberate, silent. No one spoke right away. They took in the scene. The rifle case. The open platform. The quiet. Finally, the officer said, "How many rounds did you fire?" She didn't look up immediately. She replayed the night once, quickly, the way she always did after an operation. 14, she said. A pause. All accounted for, he asked. Yes. No qualifiers. No explanation. He nodded slowly. Down below, the base was stabilizing. Power restored in sections. Perimeters locked back down. Casualty reports coming in. Far fewer than expected. Someone had done the math already. The officer cleared his throat. You weren't cleared for this, he said. She met his eyes for the first time. I know. Another silence. Then, quietly, if we hadn't called you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She stood carefully, bracing one hand on the table for just a moment longer than necessary. Sir, she said evenly. Permission to be dismissed. He hesitated, then nodded. She walked past them without ceremony, down the stairs, back into the half-lit corridors. People looked at her now. Not openly, not obviously, but differently. Whispers followed at a distance. Questions forming that no one yet knew how to ask. She returned to her quarters and closed the door. Only then did she allow herself to sit fully, exhaling long and slow. Her hands were steady, always had been. An hour later, she was summoned again, this time formally. The briefing room was full. Command staff, medical officers, intelligence. A secure line blinked to life on the far wall. She remained standing. A voice came through the speaker, measured, authoritative, distant. Staff Sergeant, it said. We've reviewed preliminary data from tonight's engagement. She listened. You operated beyond your medical clearance. Yes, sir. And you achieved results that prevented further loss of life. Yes, sir. A pause. Your medical disqualification was based on long-term deployment risk. Yes, sir. Another pause. Tonight's engagement was neither long-term nor standard. No one else spoke. The voice continued. We are initiating an immediate review of your status. She didn't react. She had learned not to. You will undergo reassessment, the voice said. Not to determine if you violated protocol, but to determine whether the protocol failed to account for operational reality. That landed. Not loudly, but precisely. After the call ended, the room remained quiet. One of the medical officers finally spoke. You shouldn't have been able to do what you did. She looked at him calmly. I didn't do it tonight, she said. I did it over 20 years. No one argued. Outside, dawn began to break. Soft light creeping over a base that had come closer to disaster than most would ever know. By mid-morning, reports were already circulating. Not names, not details, just outcomes. A coordinated internal attack. Neutralized without close engagement. Minimal casualties. Precision response. The analysts would argue later. The policymakers would debate. But among the soldiers who had been trapped in corridors and rooms that night, the story was already forming. A woman they'd never really noticed. A rifle shot from nowhere. And the sudden realization that someone had been watching over them the entire time. She spent the rest of the day undergoing scans, interviews, quiet evaluations. No one raised their voice. No one questioned her integrity. They asked about wind, about angles, about decisions. She answered all of it the same way. Calmly, directly, without embellishment. By evening, a decision had been made, though not yet announced. And as she walked back across the base, now fully lit and orderly again, she passed the same range she'd stood behind for months. The same firing line, the same targets. Only now, a young soldier stepped aside to let her pass. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. She nodded back. Some changes didn't need paperwork. They just needed proof. And what she'd done in the dark had rewritten something no document ever could. The official order came 2 days later. Not with ceremony. Not with apology. Just a sealed envelope delivered to her quarters before dawn. Inside was a single page. Reassessment authorized. Status pending. Report to evaluation at 0600. She folded it once, carefully, and set it on the table. Outside, the base was already awake. Training resumed. Schedules restored. Life moving forward as if the night hadn't nearly torn it apart. She dressed the same way she always did. No special uniform. No attempt to look impressive. She arrived early. The evaluation wasn't what she expected. There were no obstacle courses. No timed sprints. No endurance trials meant to prove something she'd already proven 100 times before. Instead, they sat her in a quiet room with people who asked different questions. Why she'd chosen the range tower instead of requesting drone support. How she'd prioritized targets without full visibility. What told her when to wait and when not to. She answered honestly. Because drones make noise. Because distance creates time. Because hesitation is louder than fear. They listened. Hours passed. Medical assessments followed, not to disqualify, but to understand. Imaging. Mobility tests. Functional movement under load. One physician watched closely as she adjusted her stance instinctively to protect her spine. You've adapted, he said. Yes, she replied. I had to. He nodded. Most people never learn how. That afternoon, she was asked to walk the same ground she'd defended. Not alone. With analysts. Instructors. People who had taught doctrine for decades. She showed them where attackers had moved. Why they'd chosen certain cover. Why some angles mattered more than equipment. At the edge of the training complex, she stopped. This, she said, pointing to a stretch of open ground, is where they lost control. An instructor frowned. That's outside the textbook. She met his eyes. The textbook hasn't been here at night, she said. No one disagreed. By evening, word had begun to spread. Not rumors, but quiet acknowledgement. People didn't ask her what she'd done. They asked how. By the third day, she was called back into the briefing room. This time, the secure line was already open. The same voice from before spoke again. Staff Sergeant, your reassessment is complete. She stood at attention. We are restoring your operational clearance, the voice said. A pause. Not as an exception. As a correction. Her breath caught. Not visibly, not audibly, but inside, something loosened that had been tight for a long time. You will not be redeployed immediately, the voice continued. Your experience is needed here. She listened. We are revising training protocols. Overwatch doctrine. Selection assumptions. Another pause. You will be involved. The line went silent. After the briefing, the commanding officer approached her. You didn't just stop an attack, he said quietly. You exposed a blind spot. She nodded once. That night, she returned to the range, this time on the firing line. No announcements. No spectators. Just steel targets set at distance. She took the rifle and settled in. The shot rang out clean and true. So did the next. And the next. Behind her, someone was watching. Not judging. Learning. By the end of the week, the language around the base had changed. People didn't say unfit anymore. They said experienced. They said exact. They said her name differently now, without doubt attached to it. She never corrected anyone. She didn't need to. Because the quiet truth had already taken root. The kind that doesn't need permission to exist. And as new training modules were drafted and old assumptions quietly removed, one thing became clear to everyone involved. The night the base went silent hadn't revealed a weakness. It had revealed a standard, and it was higher than anyone had been willing to admit before. What followed wasn't a headline. There were no press releases, no speeches, no medals pinned in front of cameras. That wasn't how real change happened. Instead, it showed up quietly, in rewritten manuals, in erased footnotes, in conversations that used to end early and now didn't. Her name began appearing in places it never had before, not as a problem to manage, not as an exception to explain, but as a reference. How did she calculate wind without sensors? How did she control space with distance alone? How did she decide when not to shoot? Those questions mattered more than her biography ever had. She kept teaching, but now, when she spoke, people listened. Not because of rank, not because of what she'd survived, because of what she'd done when it counted. Young soldiers asked to walk the tower with her, asked to stand where she'd stood, asked how she'd stayed calm when everything else failed. She told them the truth. You don't rise to the occasion, she said. You fall to your preparation. Some nodded. Some didn't understand yet. They would. The base returned fully to normal within weeks. But something underneath it had shifted. A quiet recalibration. Not just of policy, but of belief. The idea that capability could be reduced to a checklist. That experience had an expiration date. That silence meant absence. None of that survived the night. She never talked about the shots. Not the distances. Not the count. Not the precision. That wasn't the point. The point was that when the base went silent, when systems failed, assumptions collapsed, and time ran out, the answer hadn't come from authority. It had come from competence. From someone who had been there long enough to know that exactness doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives and does the work. Years later, when new instructors told the story, they wouldn't start with the attack. They'd start with the sentence, declared unfit for combat. And then they'd pause, because everyone in the room already knew how wrong that had been. Some barriers are loud. Others are written quietly, filed neatly, and defended politely. Those are the hardest ones to break. But sometimes, all it takes is one night and one person who refuses to be measured by anything except what they can do when it matters. This is Mindfront. We tell the stories of quiet professionals, hidden heroes, and moments that change everything without asking for permission. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing to Mindfront. Because the people who hold the line rarely make the noise, but they deserve to be remembered.